Okay, so picture this. You've poured a ton of time and money into translating your software into Spanish. You're ready to tap into this massive market, right? Over 400 million native speakers. But instead of sales, you're just getting a flood of support tickets, bad reviews, and users who just give up. So what on earth went wrong?
Well, here's the catch. The problem is that you didn't really localize for Spanish. You bought into the illusion that it's just one single unified market. But the reality, it's way more complex and honestly, a lot more fascinating than that. This is the classic mistake almost everyone makes. They hear Spanish and their mind immediately jumps to Spain. So they translate everything into Castilian Spanish, maybe hire a team out of Madrid, and then they figure, job done. But that's just the very, very tip of a huge and complicated iceberg. Because this is who you're actually selling to. It's not one country. We're talking about over 20 distinct nations, and every single one has its own business culture, its own laws, and you guessed it, its own version of Spanish. To really succeed here, you have to look past the surface and understand what's hiding underneath. So let's start with that first layer of complexity, the one that trips up so many businesses, the basic words you use, your terminology. The words you choose for even the most core business concepts can either build instant trust with your user, or they can immediately flag your software as something foreign, clumsy, and out of touch. All right, let's take a really fundamental idea. A customer. In Spain, they're a cliente. Sounds simple, right? But if you go to Mexico, for accounting, the correct professional term is deudor, which actually translates to debitor. Now, if you use cliente in an accounting module for a Mexican business, it's not just a little confusing, it's flat out professionally wrong. And it is the exact same story for a supplier. In Spain, sure, it's proveedor. But in Mexico and a lot of other places in Latin America, the more formal, correct accounting term is acreedor, which means creditor. See, these aren't just synonyms, they are the expected professional terms that people in the industry use every single day. And how about your inventory? Well, in Spain, using the English loanword stock is actually pretty common in user interfaces, but the formal term is existencias. Meanwhile, in Mexico and much of the Andean region, the only term that sounds truly professional is inventario. Now, what's really cool is when you step back and see how these patterns start to emerge. You can actually see the Spanish-speaking world splitting into two main camps for these core business terms. You've got Group A over here, that's Spain, Chile, Uruguay, Peru. They prefer clientes and proveedores. But then you have Group B, Mexico, Argentina, Ecuador, Venezuela, Panama. They use the more formal deudores and acreedores. If you pick the wrong one for your target market, it's like showing up to a major board meeting in a clown costume. It just doesn't work. But listen, this whole localization challenge goes so much deeper than just vocabulary. The next layer of that iceberg is the legal and financial framework itself. You see, accounting isn't just a language, it's a set of legally mandated rules that can change dramatically as you cross from one border to the next. Now, most countries do use something called the International Financial Reporting Standards, or IFRS, as a common starting point. Think of it as the shared foundation for accounting principles worldwide. But, and this is a big but, the key word there is foundation. Let's see how different countries decide to build on top of it. And this just perfectly illustrates the diversity. Spain has its own, much more rigid system called the Plan General de Contabilité. Mexico developed its own high-quality NIF standards, which are fully in line with IFRS, but they're their own separate, unique system. Then you have Argentina and Venezuela, where, because of their economic realities, they have these mandatory, incredibly complex inflation adjustments that just don't exist in standard IFRS. If your software can't handle these local rules, it's basically useless. And nowhere is this legal fragmentation more obvious than with the taxpayer ID. I mean, it's a required field on almost every single financial document. But in Spain, it's a NIF. In Mexico, it's an RFC. In Argentina, a quit. In Chile, a root. If your software's database has one single field just labeled tax ID, well, it's already broken. All right, let's go down to the deepest layer, and this is where it all comes together. We've talked about words, we've talked about laws, but what really separates a product that's just translated from one that feels truly native are the tiny, almost invisible details in the user experience. This is where you either earn or completely lose your user's trust. I mean, just let this number sink in. Over 20 markets. That is more than 20 different sets of cultural expectations for how professional software should look, how it should feel, and how it should behave. And in that context, the little things, they matter a lot. Take a simple button labeled Next. In Spanish, this actually requires a choice. Are you moving to the next step in a sequence, like in a setup wizard? If so, the word is siguiente. Or are you talking about a future event, like the next month for a report? In that case, the word is próximo. Using the wrong one just feels off. It's subtle, but it's deeply unprofessional.
And it's this kind of grammatical precision that just signals quality. A whole module for managing all your customers, that should be labeled with the plural, deudores. But a single field for just one customer's code, that has to be singular, código de deudor. Getting that level of consistency right shows that you actually understand the domain and that you respect the user's language. Okay, and here's one more classic example. The English word folder. If you're talking about a technical file path like C drive/data, the correct term is directorio. But if you're talking about the visual icon of a folder on a desktop, that's a carpeta. A truly professional accounting tool should be using directorio for its system messages because it signals technical know-how and robustness. So after seeing just how deep this iceberg goes, I know it can feel pretty overwhelming, but it's not impossible. The solution isn't to just translate more or translate harder. It's to localize smarter. And there's a clear roadmap to get it right. Really, it all boils down to 4 key steps. First, you have to define your target. Pick one. Are you launching in Mexico City or are you launching in Madrid? Second, you have to adopt their professional vocabulary, use their terms. Third, build their specific legal and tax rules right into the core of your product. And finally, you have to refine and polish every single micro detail of the user experience until it feels like it was built by locals for locals. So the next time somebody tells you your product is in Spanish, I want you to ask yourself this. Is it just translated? Is it a shallow copy that just happens to speak the language? Or is it truly localized? A native product that understands the culture, that respects the law, and that is genuinely ready to do business in one of the world's most dynamic and diverse markets.